Paris, city of light and fury. Paris, France, a city of firelight and fury. Centuries of ambition are etched into its narrow alleys and grand boulevards. Kings built it. Revolutionaries tore it down. Artists, lovers, and visionaries recreated it time and again. And in the midst of it all, the proud, stubborn, passionate, and impossible to silence Parisians. With every protest, every masterpiece, and every world-changing whisper, they pushed history forward. Using advanced AI to breathe life into forgotten engravings and silent photographs, we won't just tell this story, we will bring it to life before your eyes. From the ancient banks of the Seine to today's shimmering skyline. This is the complete history of Paris. The beginning, from Huts to Lutetia. Let's go back to the start. Before Paris was Paris, it consisted of just a few huts on an island. Around 259 BC, a Celtic tribe known as the Parisii settled on the small island in the middle of the Seine, known today as Ile de la Cité. They were fishermen. They were traders. They were people of the river, controlling a strategic crossing point. The name Parisii likely meant boat people, or craftsmen, which perfectly summarized their way of life. They weren't building monuments or writing philosophy, they were simply trying to survive. Then, in 52 BC, Julius Caesar arrived. The Romans didn't ask for permission, they conquered. The Parisii were defeated during Caesar's Gallic Wars, and their settlement was burned to the ground during the resistance. But Rome returned. They rebuilt it larger, more organized, and more systematic. The new name, Lutetia, meaning marshy place, or settlement among the waters. Not exactly grand. Roman Lutetia grew at the left bank of the Seine. For nearly 3 centuries it was a true Roman city. An amphitheater for 15,000 people, thermal baths, temples, and the foundations of what is now the Latin Quarter. The roads were straight, and the aqueducts were functional. If you were a Roman citizen, life was actually quite comfortable. But empires do not last forever. In the 3rd century, Germanic tribes began raiding from the north. The people of Lutetia retreated back to the island. Walls were erected. Fortifications were built. The Roman dream was collapsing, and Lutetia was transforming into something else. It needed a new name. That name would come with a woman who appeared just as everything was about to fall apart. Part 2. Saint Genevieve and the Franks. The 5th century was chaos. The Roman Empire was collapsing. Barbarian tribes were carving up Europe like a feast. In 451, Attila and his Hun army advanced toward Lutetia. The people were ready to abandon the city. Then a young woman emerged, Genevieve. According to legend, Genevieve persuaded the terrified citizens to stay and pray instead of fleeing, whether by miracle or strategic coincidence. Attila changed course, and the city was saved. Genevieve became the patron saint of Paris. For the first time, Paris gained an identity, a city that resists. In 508, the Frankish king Clovis I made Paris his capital. It was at that moment that Lutetia truly became Paris. Clovis converted to Christianity. Paris was no longer just a Roman relic. It became the heart and soul of a new kingdom. Churches began to rise. The city transformed into the centerpiece of the French identity. But peace did not last long. Part 3. Vikings and the Threshold of the Middle Ages. From 845 onwards, the Vikings surged up the Seine, striking at the heart of Paris. They wanted gold. Paris paid them 7,000 pounds of silver to turn them away. It wasn't a victory, it was a tribute. In 885, a much greater siege arrived. Hundreds of defenders held the bridges against thousands of Vikings for months. Paris survived once again. But it learned a vital lesson. If you want to exist, you must build strong walls. By the year 1000, the city was still small, yet it was growing. Markets were expanding. Trade was surging. Power, religion, and money were beginning to intersect in Paris. And soon, the monuments that would make Paris a legend would begin to rise. Chapter 4. Notre Dame and the Intellectual Capital. In 1163, the construction of Notre Dame Cathedral began. It would take nearly 200 years to complete. It was the pinnacle of Gothic architecture, flying buttresses, rose windows, a prayer in stone reaching toward the heavens. Paris was telling the world, "We are here." At the same time, the University of Paris was taking shape. In the early 1200s, students from across Europe flocked to the left bank. Theology, philosophy, law. This is how the Latin Quarter got its name. Here, medieval Europe was learning how to think. King Philippe II transformed the city. He paved the muddy streets with stone and built the Louvre. Not as a palace then, but as a fortress. Paris was no longer just a town to be plundered. It was a capital to be protected. By 1300, the population reached 200,000, making it one of the largest cities in Europe. But gaining importance meant becoming a target. Chapter 5. The Black Death and the 100 Years' War. The 14th century nearly destroyed Paris. First came the famine, then the 100 Years' War, beginning in 1337, and in 1348, the Black Death. 1/3, perhaps half, of the population died. Corpses piled up faster than they could be buried. Neighborhoods sat empty. If you lived in Paris during that time, you were watching the end of the world. In 1420, the city fell to the English. It remained under occupation for 16 years. Then a 17-year-old peasant girl appeared, Joan of Arc. She broke the siege of Orléans and gave hope to the French army. She didn't liberate Paris directly, but she changed the course of the war. In 1436, Paris was freed. After a century of devastation, the city was still standing, wounded but alive. Part 6. The Renaissance Beauty and Blood. The 16th century brought both elegance and horror to Paris. King Francis I, who reigned from 1515 to 1547, carried the spirit of the Renaissance from Italy to France. He ordered the reconstruction of a portion of the Louvre. The medieval fortress began its transformation into a Renaissance palace. He invited Leonardo da Vinci to France, where Leonardo spent his final years. Art was ascending. Paris was becoming more refined, more aesthetic, but the city was fracturing. In the 1560s, France was torn in two between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Paris remained fiercely Catholic. August 24th, 1572. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. At first, a few Protestant leaders were targeted. Then the city spiraled out of control. Catholic mobs hunted Protestants through the streets. Thousands were slaughtered in Paris, their bodies tossed into the Seine. The violence surged across the country. It is estimated that the total death toll reached 70,000. Paris was beautiful, but it was bloody. In 1589, King Henry III was assassinated. The man who ascended to the throne, Henry IV, was a Protestant, but to rule Paris he converted to Catholicism. He is famously quoted as saying, "Paris is well worth a mass." He entered the city in 1594. Slowly the wounds began to heal. The Pont Neuf bridge was built. The Place des Vosges was planned. Paris was standing up once again. Part 6. The Renaissance, Beauty and Blood. The 16th century brought both elegance and horror to Paris. King Francis I, who reigned from 1515 to 1547, carried the spirit of the Renaissance from Italy to France. He ordered the reconstruction of a portion of the Louvre. The medieval fortress began its transformation into a Renaissance palace. He invited Leonardo da Vinci to France, where Leonardo spent his final years. Art was ascending. Paris was becoming more refined, more aesthetic, but the city was fracturing. In the 1560s, France was torn in two between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Paris remained fiercely Catholic. August 24th, 1572. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. At first, a few Protestant leaders were targeted. Then the city spiraled out of control. Catholic mobs hunted Protestants through the streets. Thousands were slaughtered in Paris, their bodies tossed into the Seine. The violence surged across the country. It is estimated that the total death toll reached 70,000. Paris was beautiful, but it was bloody. In 1589, King Henry III was assassinated. The man who ascended to the throne, Henry IV, was a Protestant. But to rule Paris, he converted to Catholicism. He is famously quoted as saying, "Paris is well worth a mass." He entered the city in 1594. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. The Pont Neuf bridge was built. The Place des Vosges was planned. Paris was standing up once again. Part 7. Absolute Power and the Sun King. The 17th century established Paris as the center of Europe. Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu centralized power. In 1635, the Académie Française was founded. Even the language was being brought under control. Then came Louis XIV, the Sun King. He turned the monarchy into a spectacle. The Louvre was expanded and Les Invalides was built. Yet, in 1682, he moved the court to Versailles. He did not trust Paris. The city had a rebellious past. Nevertheless, Paris remained the cultural heart. Salons, intellectuals, fashion, cuisine, elegance. Paris was now the style guide for all of Europe. But the tension between the people and the monarchy was rising. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. Part 8. Revolution. Blood and Liberty. The 18th century began with the Age of Enlightenment. Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot. Ideas were debated in cafes, authority was being questioned, but the streets were miserable. More than 600,000 people lived in poverty, disease, and hunger. The cemeteries overflowed. Bones were moved to underground stone quarries. This is how the Paris catacombs we know today were born, the bones of 6 million people. By 1789, France was bankrupt. The price of bread had skyrocketed. July 14th, 1789. The people of Paris stormed the Bastille. The French Revolution began. In 1793, Louis XVI was sent to the guillotine. Months later, Marie Antoinette followed. The Reign of Terror began. Thousands were executed. The streets of Paris saw blood. Then Robespierre himself faced the guillotine. The revolution devoured its own children. France was exhausted, and then a general stepped onto the stage. Part 9. Napoleon and the Empire. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seized power. Paris became the capital of an empire. Construction began on the Arc de Triomphe. The Louvre was transformed into a public museum. The Napoleonic Code laid the foundations of modern law. But the empire did not last forever. In 1814, Paris was occupied by foreign armies. Napoleon was sent into exile. He returned for the 100 Days, only to be defeated at Waterloo. Paris survived once again, but once again it was scarred. Part 10. Revolutions without end. After Napoleon, the House of Bourbon returned, but Paris was no longer the same. In the July Revolution of 1830, the people rose up once again. Barricades were built. King Charles X was toppled. In his place, the citizen king, Louis Philippe, took the throne. But it wasn't enough. In 1848, Paris exploded again. The monarchy collapsed and the Second Republic was proclaimed. Workers demanded social reform. The army killed thousands in response. Paris was at war with itself, and out of the chaos emerged a name, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. He was elected president in 1848. In 1851, he staged a coup and declared himself Napoleon III. Part 11. Haussmann tears down. Paris. Napoleon III decided to transform the city. He commissioned Baron Haussmann. Between 1853 and 1870, Paris was nearly rebuilt from scratch. The narrow, dark, medieval streets were demolished. In their place, wide boulevards were opened. Why? For modernization, yes, but also for control. It was difficult to build barricades on wide avenues, and soldiers could move with ease. Those elegant, cream-colored apartments we see today, those symmetrical facades, those tree-lined boulevards, they are all products of this era. Paris became beautiful, but thousands of the poor were displaced. Part 12. The Paris Commune. In 1870, France declared war on Prussia. It was a disaster. Paris was besieged. To survive, people ate rats, cats, and even animals from the zoo. In January 1871, the city surrendered. But in March, the people rose up yet again. The Paris Commune was established. Worker rights, direct democracy, social reform. It lasted only 2 months. In May 1871, government troops entered the city. The Bloody Week. More than 10,000 people were killed. Paris was once again washed in its own blood. Part 13. Belle Époque. The Golden Age of Light. From the 1870s to 1914, Paris lived its golden age. Monet, Renoir, Degas, they captured light on canvas. The Moulin Rouge opened, and the cabaret became a legend. In 1889, the Eiffel Tower was erected. At first it was hated. They called it an iron monstrosity. Today, it is the symbol of Paris. The metro opened in 1900. The city was flowing like electricity. But Europe was arming itself. Part 14. The World Wars. In 1914, the First World War began. The Germans came within 50 kilometers of Paris. They were stopped at the Battle of the Marne. Paris was saved, but France lost more than 1 million soldiers. The 1920s, the Roaring Years, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Picasso, Coco Chanel redefined fashion. Paris was once again the heart of the world. Then came 1940. The Nazis marched into Paris. The swastika flew beside the Eiffel Tower. More than 13,000 Jews were arrested in the Veldiv roundup. Most never returned. There was resistance, underground newspapers, sabotage, smuggled pilots. In August 1944, Paris rose up. Barricades were built once more. On August 25, 1944, the city was liberated. Paris was free but marked by shame and pain. Part 15, 1968, and Modern Paris post-war, Paris became the center of existentialism. Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir. In May 1968, students and workers took to the streets. The Latin Quarter saw barricades once again. The government did not fall, but society changed. In 1977, the Pompidou Center opened, modern, inside-out architecture. In 1989, the Louvre Pyramid was completed. The 21st century has not been easy. The 2005 suburb riots, the 2015 terror attacks, the 2019 Notre Dame fire. Yet Paris still stands. It hosted the 2024 Olympics, and the world looked toward the banks of the Seine once more. Conclusion. For 2,000 years, Paris has burned. It has been destroyed. It has been reborn. It was occupied, looted. It saw revolution. It saw blood. But it always came back. Because Paris is not just a city, it is an idea. an idea of freedom, art, and resistance. And history tells us only one thing: Paris may fall, but it never surrenders.